This is such a treat. All of these are such a treat, but this is just like such an extra special treat, because you're here to talk about your book, Hot Wax, ML Rio, and I just met you in person in Portland not 2 days ago.
Y-
Thank you. Or was it what? Yeah, who even knows, right? You're like on stop
I've pretty much
38.
just been on airplanes since then. So,
Right.
for me, it's just kind of long, spongy sort of time has lost all meaning.
That is such a great way to describe air travel. Like time during air travel, it just becomes like spongy. It just, yeah, it dilates, but in the weirdest way. Anyway, yes, some time has passed, but not much since we met in person. And thank you for coming on the little Podstack podcast. Love your book. Super excited to talk about it. And I am super excited, of course, to dive into your others. I have my copy of If We Were Villains here. You gave a great event, my friend, and I really want to talk too about like what touring's been like for you. But before we even start on the like industry intricacies, I want to introduce those I'm sure few who follow me who don't also know you because I have a very bookish crowd. Um, you are ML Rio. Your latest book is Hot Wax. You have published two other books. If We Were Villains, which is an international bestseller, and The Graveyard Shift, which is like a standalone novella, which I think is like so fabulous. I'm very excited to read that. I'm a huge fan of the novella form. But like to get into your bio a bit here, you've worn a lot of hats. You've been an actor, a bookseller, an academic, and a music writer, an avid road tripper and record collector. When you're not on the hunt for the next big score, you live in South Philly with the world's best road dog, Marla. What an early modernist name to give your dog. That's so cute. And of course, you hold an MA in Shakespeare Studies from King's College in London and Shakespeare's Globe and a PhD in English from the University of Maryland, College Park. The best-selling novel, the one I just held up, If We Were Villains, has been published in 22 countries. My God. Oh, that's amazing. That's so cool. Your first novella, Shift, which I don't have the visual aid for, alas, was a USA Today and Sunday Times bestseller. And Hot Wax, which I keep holding up, and I will again, is already a USA Today and indie bestseller. So that sounds like an amazing sales track. Um, thank you for being here again.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
This is phenomenal. Yeah. Um, if you feel great about this, and I understand that you do because you've got a little selection prepared, could you read a little bit from Hot Wax?
I can. Yeah. And just to give like a quick sort of log line for the book.
Mm,
So I actually pitched this book to my agent as this is Spinal Tap meets Thelma and Louise.
thank you.
It takes place on two timelines. There's an A-side timeline and a B-side timeline because it's set up like a little bit like a vinyl record. And in the
Hmm.
A-side timeline, our main character, I use air quotes because I don't know that I really have main characters, but our main character, Suzanne, is 10 years old. She's on the road with her father's rock band. And then in the B-side timeline, she's in her early 40s and kind of on the run from some stuff in her personal life and retracing the steps of that disastrous concert tour 30 years ago. So I'm going to read you a little bit from the A side very, very early in the book. And this is just sort of Suzanne's introduction to the world of record collecting. The mall's walkways felt too wide without any other people on them. The lights were too bright, the air too cold, the music too quiet. Suzanne wandered the map she knew so well like a stranger, taking random turns in escalators, but she kept coming back to the same landing. The music was a little louder there. She realized the PA system had been shut off, and instead the sound was coming from the record store. The security grill hadn't been lowered all the way, and feeling oddly defiant, she ducked underneath. The only person inside was a chubby, gap-toothed stock boy. He had a wiry red beard like Hagar the Horrible and dozens of LPs in shrink wrap piled on the floor in front of him. He moved a price tag from the left corner of a record to the right, did the same to the record beneath, and the one beneath that, and the one beneath that. Suzanne watched him painstakingly move price tags from left to right 5 times and asked, "What are you doing?" He jumped and clutched his heart. Suzanne noticed her own was no longer hammering, as if breaching the terra incognita of the record store had reset some sort of tripwire in her body. Jesus, kid, don't sneak up on somebody like that. Sorry. She tilted her head to read the name tag he'd knocked askew. Doug. Doug scowled. Do you have a parent somewhere? My mom works at Macy's. Okay, well, you can't play in here. Can I help? What? Can I stay if I help? She pointed at the LPs, a stack of shiny black squares, each with the scaly, hooked head of a buzzard peering out from the center. Skin a shocking shade of pink, the words hard candy dangling from its beak like roadkill. She knew that song, Hard Candy. She'd heard it on the radio. Doug started to say no, but changed his mind halfway. How old are you, 8? I'm 10. She didn't say today. Double digits or not, still small for her age. You know left and right? He glanced at the Elvis Presley clock on the wall, hips ticking back and forth. She wiggled her fingers. Left-handed. Okay, so move the price tags from left to right, all right? Like how you read, left to right. She set her backpack down and sat. Why are we moving them left to right? Because Billy is an idiot and he put them in the wrong corner, and corporate won't let us put them on the floor in the morning if the price tags are in the wrong corner. And if they're not on the floor in the morning, there'll be hell to pay. He stabbed a sticker down and left a smudged thumbprint on the cellophane. What's corporate? Suzanne asked. A pain in my fat ass, but they've put everybody else out of business, so here we are, violating child labor laws so Babblemouth can make another $1,000,000. Who's Babblemouth? Doug turned one of the records over. That, he said, is Babblemouth. Nikki and Vince DeWitt and their army of miscreants. They were somebody, Suzanne thought. She'd heard their names before, but she'd never seen what they looked like. They wore a lot of dark eye makeup, which made their pale faces even paler. She thought the photo was in black and white, except that one of them was wearing lipstick, the same poisonous pink as the buzzard on the front. So that was what somebody looked like. She could have looked much longer, but Doug turned the record back over, resumed moving stickers. Suzanne watched and learned that they didn't come off easily. She coaxed them loose by corner until they finally peeled free. Left to right, just like Elvis's hips. She bobbed her head to the bump of the bass from the speakers in the ceiling. Is this Babblemouth? She said. The song. Doug snorted. Definitely not. Why? You like it? Suzanne nodded yes. Never heard License to Ill before? Never heard the Beastie Boys? Suzanne shook her head no. A grin broke through the root-bound tangle of Doug's red beard. Kid, he said, I'm about to change your life.
My applause needs to be heard. I love that. I imagine Doug as Jack Black
I love
in
that.
some good. I'm just glad. Yeah, I like it's such a kind of like junior high fidelity scene there,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna ask a couple of like questions this question out of sequence, and because this is a book, and you spoke about this in Portland, but like this is a book about rock and roll that you're publishing in 2025, and I'm also like peak millennial aged person who knows about Christopher Guest films, has a Freddie Mercury at Live Aid tattoo,
I
like
saw that.
I feel like I'm with you where I'm just kind of like, oh, I love some of these references that like feel a bit out of time almost for the year we're living in. I mean, that's actually what's so endearing about Hot Wax for me too is it's just like you have Suzanne, on the A side, she's like kind of like growing up before her time, right? She's growing up so fast, like she's like traveling with her dad's band. She's like, a young photographer at age 10 buying this camera. And like, she's ahead of the curve. But on the B side, she's almost kind of trying to find her younger self again, right? And you have this not quite all fours situation, but you have kind of like a rediscovery of sexuality in her in midlife. And then Gil, of course, could have been Prince and Bowie and Freddie all rolled into one, right? But time kind of passed him by too. And so I'm so curious, right? Since this is a book, I'm presume we're pretty. I think we're if maybe the same. We're close in age, right? We're in our 30s, and this is a book about kind of an era that was like predates us a bit, right? Like you tell
Yeah.
that story about your dad putting the CDs on your bed and being like, "Educate yourself." Led Zeppelin, David, but
Yeah.
what is it? Yeah, like I'm so curious about like what's it like to write this book and in fact publish it, right? It's a topic that's out of time, and some of the characters in it are kind of out of time. Like it's just such an interesting phenomenon. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's It's interesting. I think I was always kind of dislocated in time as a young person. I was one of those kids who everyone called me an old soul, and my parents, the joke with my parents that I was that I was born like 45 years old. I started talking really young and talking really fast and reading really young and reading really fast. And Suzanne is not supposed to be me in any kind of a way. We have some
No.
similar interests and a couple of personality traits in common, but um I was one of the things we did have in common was I was also kind of precocious in that way that I was, my dad used to say that talking to me as a kid was just like talking to a tiny adult. Um, and I just kind of always gravitated towards things that had an interesting history and an interesting past instead of stuff that was sort of like of the moment. And I don't totally know where that impulse comes from, but the older I've gotten, I think it's really I did grow up before the internet. I grew up with a lot of technology that was brand new and then became obsolete really, really fast. And there's been some really interesting studies of millennials specifically and how disjointed we feel because we watched so much cutting edge technology become obsolete so fast. It's sort of like we have this outsized sense of nostalgia for something like, I don't know, like the Game Boy was the
It,
height of technology for a
yeah,
hot minute, and now it's like kind
yeah,
of so endearingly obsolete. Um,
right.
so I do have just kind of this interest in the history of popular culture because I think that is often not taken super seriously in academic circles, and I ran into that in my PhD. I always wanted to write about the history of popular music, and I got a lot of this is not a serious subject for academic inquiry, and I was like, anything that so many people are influenced by should be a serious subject of academic inquiry. So I kind of made it one with this book, not to make it sound like a textbook. Um, but one of the characters in the book is a vintage seller. That's what she does, is like she buys and sells vintage clothes and kitsch and that sort of thing. And at one point, there's a line where she says something about it's hard to think of your own youth as vintage.
Mm,
But
yeah,
I think we're now in a moment where technology moves so fast, not just from year to year, but like we can't avoid talking about it, the sort of like pervasive, constant conversation about AI is moving so fast that it does feel very, very difficult to sort of get your bearings in time. And it feels really strange that stuff that's really only like 20 years old is now considered vintage or historical. Like I saw somebody label a novel that took place in the aughts historical fiction, and I was like, I think I'll show myself out. Uh,
right.
but I think
Ugh.
there's a lot of significance to analog media, specifically in this moment when all of our cultural institutions are so much under threat. And there is this sense of once we switch to a streaming and subscription economy, there's so little that we have like a tactile relationship anymore with when it comes to media, except for people who, still buy physical books and things. And what scares me about that is it's really easy to erase digital history, and we're already seeing that happen. Um, and I think it teaches us to receive art as transient and ephemeral instead of thinking of it as a thing that should have a long life. So yeah, I'm kind of pushing everybody I talk to like, if you don't have an archive of physical media, start now because you never know when some billionaire CEO at Spotify is going to have a spat with somebody at Warner Brothers and just decide that you're no longer allowed to listen to your favorite album because they can't work the contract out. So for me, there's just something like really comforting about the concrete physical object of art, the physical art object that used to be just the norm, 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, I almost see with both of your books, like just thematically speaking, you're introducing in many cases, right? If they're meeting you on Instagram, if they're meeting you on TikTok or something, you're introducing a much younger readership, right? To in the case of if we were villains, right? Like Shakespeare and like early modern scholarship, right? Like the
Yeah.
history, the tragedy beyond Romeo and Juliet. We're actually like learning about like who Shakespeare was as a writer and what the structures of the plot look like. And I think in Hot Wax, you're like one of my favorite writers, Jonathan Lethem. He talks about this his generation of Gen Xers. They were collectors, and there's
Hmm.
that moment in Fortress of Solitude, right, where the
Just going to
girlfriend is
mention
just
that
like
book. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought you that you'd be a fan of that one too. It's just like she's like you collect things, and that can also one can build kind of a she was accusing him of building kind of like a temple or a tomb, right? Of like too many objects. But
Yeah,
it's the extreme. But of course, we're talking here about the extreme of like the ephemeral art object, the art object that is not tangible, it's not tactile. And so I
it's not
feel
even an
like
object.
it's not exactly. It's like no, the art concept, right? Yeah, like what
Yeah,
is? God, that's his whole own conversation. But I just feel like with these books, you're kind of you've reached such a wide readership, and you're introducing these readers to these concepts that they might really wouldn't encounter in other very widely read titles. I think so. That's really cool.
yeah, I love that. And it wasn't something that I like kind of deliberately set out to do, but as the world has sort of shifted around me in the last, you know, um, 10 years of my publication history, that is something that I've thought about more and more, especially because with a book like this, we talked a lot about how do we get my existing readership that which just because of the publication history of villains, which I know we'll talk about later, um, they are a bit younger than I am, and
Mm,
this book is already a little bit older than me in some ways. So we talked a lot with my in-house team about like how do we bring really young readers along for the ride with this book when some of
yeah.
them are not even going to realize that these are real bands and real music. Most of it, there's two bands in the book that I made up, but there's a lot of stuff. I told this story in Portland, so forgive me, you've heard it already. My assistant, who's a Gen Zer, was reading this book for the first time and said to me, "Oh, I love all the band names that you made up for this book." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "Oh, Captain Beefheart, like that's so funny."
Ah,
And I was like, "Captain Beefheart is 100% a real artist, as are most of the other ones mentioned here."
yeah.
And, like regardless, I think because sales track is such a fickle thing, if you're going to survive as an artist, you have to find other ways to kind of define your own success and satisfaction in what you do. And
Totally.
when I was in my PhD program, I was also a teacher. And so it has become part of like my art identity, my writer identity, and one of my objectives to be like, great, you know what? If this book introduces some young people to some new old music that they've never heard before, awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need more out of it than that.
Yeah. No. I mean, and I think that just the value of that alone, I think is immense. I want to talk too about the peripatetic quality of the book. And thank you for using that word at
Oh,
the
thank
Portland
you.
event with so many young people there. I was like, she's taught. I know how. It was a great time. But yeah, I mean, truly, it is right. It's like you have every single story, every side of the LP that is this novel is a road trip story, right? So, we've got Suzanne on the road with her dad's band, Gil and the Kills. We've got Suzanne running from her past. We've got Rob, described very aptly by one of your readers as the normie from hell. That is so correct. He feels like he's out of an early Tim Burton movie
Yeah.
in the worst way.
Yeah. Like
To
he's like the guy that one of those dudes from like one of the jocks from Edward Scissorhands would grow up to be.
That is exact. Yeah. God, I love to do late 80s references with you. Yeah, no, but that's what I was thinking. He's like in a pastel sweater. Anyway, but he's on the road, right? Everyone's on the road here. So there's that old kind of canard, right, about like travel or road trip or whatever kind of like forward motion. Um a character's engaged in that they're either running from something or they're running to something, right? And I think that like, well, that can be kind of a cliche. It's I mean, it's a cliche because it's true in many ways. And I'm so curious about like whether that idea animate was like animating you as you were writing these characters, and also just you have described yourself as being someone who's constantly in motion and was loath to settle down during your PhD. So, maybe as you're in the midst of a 40 city tour, however many crazy amount of places you're going, this might be a good thing to reflect on. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm actually so I'm in between red-eye flights for like 12 hours right now as we're doing this interview, and I'm so glad that you can't see the rest of my office because it's just like an explosion of like bags and stuff and me trying to figure out packing outerwear is so hard when you have like a really limited baggage allowance. I'm in the UK for two
Yeah.
weeks, but I have to fly to Dublin, so I'm on Ryanair for one flight, which is like its own special circle of hell. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
put one coat in my bag and I'm over the weight limit. So that's been fun, Tetris. But
Uh,
yeah, I grew up traveling a lot. My family's from California, but we lived all over the place for my dad's job, and we drove a lot of places. And kind of in the back of the car with my headphones on was really sort of where I learned to write because music was always point zero of my writing process, and just being somewhere that I could kind of look at the world and look at a world that was changing around me while I was listening to music and just sort of dreaming up stories. So that's always been sort of essential to my just nature as a storyteller. And I really love a good narrative. And I know that we're kind of in this moment in publishing where like having a narrative at all is considered kind of lowbrow and disqualifies you from being considered literary fiction. But sue me, I like a good story. That's always the drive, pun intended, for me when I'm writing. But yeah, with this particular book, it is a little bit slow in the first half, like it's kind of a slow burn, and that's sort of by design. I wanted this book to feel like you're on a road trip with the characters as much as possible, and it does have these two sort of parallel road trips that kind of hurtle towards each other until they sort of collide at the end. Um, but yeah, that too, I think, has something to do with the structure of narrative. I just wanted it to feel like people were moving and like this thing had momentum, even though it is slow at the start. But to your point about running to something and running away from something, one thing I noticed when I was part of the way I research is when I'm writing a new book, I read like every book in the genre I can get my hands on. And I noticed something really interesting, which is actually not surprising in retrospect, but road trip novels are usually about men. They're almost always by men, and they're usually about men. And road trip novels about men are always about men chasing something, trying to find themselves. It's like a journey of self-discovery, generally. Road trip novels about women and non-binary people are about them running away from something that is trying to kill them, almost
mm,
always. And I was like, well, that doesn't feel accidental.
yeah.
And I've seen reflections of that in my own life. Like when I talk to men about the way I live, which is I travel like 200 days a year and I'm usually in the car. I drive myself alone most places voluntarily because I really enjoy that. In the process of writing this book, I did like 6 or 7 cross-country road trips, and then when I was doing the last big teardown, I actually just lived out of a two-door 2012 Honda for like 18 months. And I loved it. I loved that life. I loved being on the road. But whenever I talked to my male friends about this, they'd be like, wow, that's so great. That sounds so liberating. I wish I could do that. And when I talked to women about it or non-binary folks, all my women and non-binary friends were like, that sounds really scary. Do you feel safe? Do you have
Mm,
pepper spray? Do you have a gun? Um, and it is different. It's different.
yeah.
It's different being someone who is not, the alpha species, if you will, in our kind of cultural landscape, just kind of out on the road on your own where nobody knows where you are. So I was thinking a lot about those cliches and thinking about how other elements kind of map onto that cliche, like gender, for instance. And then, another thing that might be worth talking about is age, because usually road trip novels are about young people kind of going to find themselves. And in the B-side timeline, Suzanne is in her early 40s and she's kind of, I heard someone call it a second coming of age novel, which I actually really liked. I was like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's almost like she's road tripping so intensely and she's missed her window, right? Because
Hmm.
she goes on a totally age inappropriate, road trip with the band when she's 10. And that's kind of what, the huge emotional bomb that goes off in the A side. And then like when she's 40, right, she's road tripping again. But then, you think of, just like you said, you think of road tripping like novels with, characters that are like 25, right,
Hmm.
to 27. And it's wild if I hadn't actually given thought to how that genre breaks down by gender, but I think, yeah, if I think of the road trip novels I've read, they totally conform to the schema you've just described. And too, I want to talk also about like narrative arc and structure because I also do me too. I appreciate an ensemble cast. I appreciate, you know what I mean, like psychological realism. I love a plot. And I'm not saying Joyce Carol Oates was right to call certain other books one little husks. That's not correct. But I think it is possible to fall into an omphallo skepsis. Like, like just whoa, tunneling in territory where you are so like I don't know, like you feel like hidebound, obligated to write what you know, that you are then starting to make like art of your life as it's happening or before it's happened. And then there's the separation. Not that art is bad, but the separation can be difficult. And that's what
Hmm.
makes some of those books feel like oof, caving in sometimes. That's why Hot Wax too, though, feels like such a breath of fresh air. Because truly, right, no matter how many people are going to come up to you, Em, and be like, "Are you Suzanne? Are you Gil? Are
Yeah.
you Gil and Suzanne?" It's like, okay, that happens. Readers do that, right? But it's like I mean, you have a cast that is, it's kind of like they're orchestrated, or that rather the book's architecture. I think like kind of belies the fact that you are a scholar of narrative and a scholar of Shakespeare, and not the kind of early modernist you see at conferences who's quizzing you on dates,
Yeah.
and and who oh my God, who's like quizzing you on dates about the Fairy King, like not that kind of stuff, but who's actually like dug into the text, right? And like
Yeah.
cares about like why is Henry VIII compelling? So I mean that's my follow-up question. I'm like, what is like what how do you take, kind of all these different lives you've lived, right? Like scholar, journalist. How do you fuel all that into creating these like realist narratives that are so far reaching?
Um, well, I think that's what it is. I've been really lucky to have so many different life experiences and kind of concurrently. I've done a lot of this stuff sort of all at the same time.
Yeah,
Um, I was doing most of the research and the writing of this novel while I was still in my PhD program, and I was doing my journalism work at the same time. Um, and just having a really varied life experience, I think, gives you the ability to write characters who are not just self-inserts. Uh,
sure.
it When you have a broader experience of life in the world in general, it just opens up the things that you can write about because that cliche, write what you know, is still true, but you just know a lot more if you have all these different points of contact with different kinds of life. And I think part of the reason that so much of like highly lauded literary fiction gets into this sort of like navel gazing space is it partly has to do with the way that we teach writing. When I was in collegiate undergraduate writing programs, I was rejected by every single MFA I applied to for what it's worth. And I think that was actually good for me because in looking back on it, I think that doing an MFA actually would have kind of ruined me as a writer. Not that it does that for everyone. I think it's the right choice for a lot of people. It was not the right choice for the kind of writer that I wanted to be because, again, I like a plot and MFAs really don't. Um, but even at the undergrad level, a lot of the way we teach writing is write 5,000 short stories, just like write short stories over and over again. And we see this a lot with MFA students where they like write a bunch of short stories. They graduate from some kind of really prestigious program. There's an expectation that now they're going to write a novel. And the problem is they have no idea how to write a novel because they've never written a novel. And writing a bunch of short stories does not teach you how to write a novel because it's a completely different kind of narrative structure. So we end up with a lot of these very introspective, very, what's the word? Kind of intellectual literary fiction that doesn't know how to do plot because the writers have never learned how to do plot because they've never had to. I mean, you can have a plot in a short story, but it's a very different kind of a beast than sustaining a narrative over two, three, 400 pages. Um, and it sucks to be like, yeah, in order to write a novel, you're going to have to write 4 or 5 novels that really suck first because that's the only way to learn how to do it. But it's a long game. It's a long game.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I think that's part of the reason that we now have this sort of trend in literary fiction towards stuff that is kind of quiet and plotless and lyrical, and it's almost like poetry more than it is really like a novel. Or it's kind of edging into memoir, like autofiction is really big now. And again, none of these are value judgments. It's just it's not the style of writing that I've ever done, which can be difficult, difficult to market and to advertise. But you know, when you live a lot of different lives, you end up with a lot of stories. Like I have a bunch of different narratives that kind of make up the person that I am about, my academic career and my writing career and my all my music stuff. And then you have all your personal relationships. And I think, life is narrative. life is this, we have a beginning and many middles and an end, and we've been telling stories since before we had a system of writing. So I think that really is partly kind of in our human nature, our ability to use language and to craft narrative about anything, whether it's like, prehistoric people being like, there's a lion over there, watch yourself. That's a kind of narrative. So I think we're allergic to that at our peril.
I agree with you there, and I think, the whole like beginning, middle, and end, right? The three act structure, the Freytag's triangle, right? There's like these are useful ways to think of stories, sure, but I think that like when we remove those schematics from life and from the real life analogs, everything is in the academy now, right? And this is actually like where like Gen X like made this huge shift because you have the proliferation of the MFA program, yada yada, the 80s and stuff, and like Gen X is really like they I feel like they were the first ones who were like with programs like of course Iowa, Bennington, Michigan, all these places taught to kind of start to make that bridge towards a more like autofictional or a more kind of like self-searching, quieter narrative. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but like when you describe this, right, like it's like, oh man, I think so much. I think like of the I forget if it's not D.H. Lawrence. I can't remember who it is who's like who said like the king died and the queen died is not a story, but the king died and the queen died of grief is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like I was fed that a lot in grad school. Not that it's not true, right? But it's like that actually makes the lion story really suspenseful. It's like there's a lion, look over there. Okay, what's gonna happen next?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the beginning and the middle. But yeah, to that point, right? It's like when you describe your experiences, and I think I could also speak, for some of mine as well. It's another instance of feeling a little bit out of time because I'm like, wow, like, you know, I'm almost reminded of like kind of the Gonzo tradition of the 70s, right? Like, it's like a more Didion Thompson, Tom Wolfe kind of, and well, I don't know how much yada yada, but you know what I mean, right? Like, it's just
Yeah.
kind of like it's like, hey, like there are stories out there, you can go live them and experience them, and it's a bit of a different climate now. Last question in this vein, though, you spoke about writing live music, and you do it so well in here. And frankly, some of my favorite scenes are the scenes where like the Gill and the Kills are not playing to large audiences, they're playing in dive bars, they're trying to make the best. Oh man, you do such a great job of that. Um, Jennifer Egan obviously is kind of the headliner, one of the headliners for writing about this with Physical Lagoon Squad. I saw you got a blurb from her. That's amazing.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
yeah, it was super cool to see that in the back. But I'm really curious because I know your journalism and like your like in the moment lived experience really fed that. Um, like how do you see yourself kind of like let me put it this way. What other kind of music writing influenced you, and how do you see yourself sort of situated among writers like Egan, writers who are really capturing classic rock in motion?
Yeah, it's something that I think that we've kind of lost in not lost completely, but music magazines are folding left and right. Magazines in general are folding left and right. In the same way that a lot of publications don't do book reviews anymore, it's very hard to find album reviews anywhere except in a couple of kind of dedicated publications. And it's we're also the gap is widening in every art landscape between kind of the haves and the have-nots, and streaming is a really large part of that. The way that the algorithm works on Spotify is such that it magnifies artists that are already huge and squashes artists that are really small. And because of that, many, many young people, all of the artists that they listen to are like already at a stadium level by the time they discover them. And there is just no lifeblood in that. Like going to sit in the nosebleed seats for a concert that's been performed 97 times and is choreographed so precisely that nothing can possibly go wrong. It's basically like watching TV at that point. And there's nothing wrong with TV, but that's not what I come to live music for. What I
Right.
love about live performance, and this is true of my rock writing and also of my Shakespeare scholarship, is that idea of bodies in a space. I'm really interested in embodiment in art and how our our brains and the bodies that carry them around, how they kind of interact with other bodies in a space. And when we're telling a story, whether it's a play or whether it's a concert, like how that kind of impacts the body. Um, because that's another thing that I think we see in a lot of art these days is this sort of like disregard of the body, and that's that navel gazing again, kind of removes the physical from the reading experience. Um, and art is so much more lively before it has been kind of rehearsed to death, at least live performance. The best shows I've ever been to have been little club shows where there's like 20 to 100 people in the audience and the band has that really intimate connection with them and you have no idea what's going to happen next because there probably isn't a lot of security. The whole thing isn't choreographed to death. And it still has that kind of spark of potentiality that I think gets stamped out by the time you've handed it to Live Nation and tickets cost $400 to sit, up in the nosebleed seats where you're just looking at a jumbotron anyway. It's like stay home at that point. Um, so in my job as a music writer, for a while, I was sort of like the one woman classic rock desk at my magazine, which was so funny because I was like the youngest person on staff. Everything I wanted to listen to and everything I wanted to cover was not the stuff that was big. It was stuff that might have been big a long time ago, or you never got big and has always been sort of cult. And that's where the joy of it really is for me. That's where kind of like the real kernel of what's cutting edge still is. So that was something I really wanted to kind of spotlight with the band in the book, Gill and the Kills. Like they haven't made it. They're still kind of struggling along. Yeah, they have some shows in some cities where they have a lot of fans, but the next night they might be playing a dive bar where six people show up. Because that's also just, I think, true of what happens when you are fighting to get to a place where you have enough fans that you can kind of reliably go out on the road and tour. And I've spent a lot of time with bands like that where, they might play First Avenue one night and have thousands of people in the audience, and the next night play like a weird dance hall in Boise where there are 25 people who don't even know what the band is, and they're just like, oh, this looks like fun. Um, and that's so alive to me that I was like, that's something I really want to put on the page. But um and some of my reading, I read every music novel I could get my hands on, and some of my frustration with it was a lot of those novels kind of resist putting it on stage. They don't want to
Mm,
write these big loud concert scenes because first of all, action is hard. Um, and especially writing something that is essentially sort of audio visual and putting that on the page in a way that feels real is tough. But all of my favorite music writing has actually been journalism. It's been people like Bob Christgau and Lester Bangs and Nick Kent is one of my favorites. Like the way they write about live music and musicians as journalists, it makes you want to be there in the room with them. Or if you know the music really well, you have these moments of being like, oh God, yeah, that's exactly what that sounds like. And I never would have known to put it in those words. So um, when I was kind of coming at the live concert scenes in this book, that was something that I really wanted to sort of shine a light on because I felt like it was missing from a lot of music novels. And because I'm a performance studies scholar and also a music journalist, I was like, maybe that's something I can do well. Maybe I'm the person to write that book. And I think Suzanne also has some of that instinct. She goes on to in her teenage and early 20s years is working for kind of a little underground zine in New York, and she's a photographer, so her perspective on it is a little different. But yeah, I think all writers should read more nonfiction. I think all writers should read more nonfiction, partly because nonfiction is not navel-gazing in that way. I mean, memoir can be, but nonfiction that's really about something outside of the writer, there's a lot of narrative there because that's how you make it make sense to a reader.
totally. Wow. And then you had a book you actually recommended in Portland, or a couple.
Yeah.
Could you say which of those books or both of those
Yeah.
books?
Yeah, I recommended two books. One was a novel. I did my launch at the Strand with John Ray, W-R-A-Y, who wrote
Hmm.
this book called Gone to the Wolves, which is all about death metal.
Yeah.
And it is
Yeah.
one of the best books I've ever read for live music. The way he writes about concert scenes, I was like, oh, this guy gets it. This guy gets it in a way that I don't typically see with fiction writers, but I do see with journalists. Um, like just the way he describes being in the audience for a show that is like life changing. I went, yeah, he nailed it. I've had that experience. I've had that feeling. And that's really what you're kind of chasing with fiction, right? Is the moment where the reader goes, oh my God, I know that feeling, but I've never been able to put it in words. So John does that really, really well in Gone to the Wolves. And the other thing I love about Gone to the Wolves is he nails the culture of music freaks. Like every concert scene that he writes, there's always commentary about like what everybody is wearing, who's at this show, how you know who the acolytes are, and how you know who the like noobs are based on what they're wearing and the slang that they're using. Because that is so much a part of the scene. I was like, yeah, I can tell that he has lived this, really lived this. And then the other book I recommended is by a guy named Jim Ruland, also a music writer. And I also did an event with him, self-described old punk who lives by the sea.
Oh,
He's a contributor to the Razor Cake zine, and the book that I recommended is called Corporate Rock Sucks. And it's all about the label SST, which was Black Flag's label that came out of the kind of like Hermosa Beach hardcore scene. So,
mm,
one thing I love about that book is he gets really, really granular about the way these bands were performing and the way they were touring and how that shaped the label, which is a really fascinating sort of the reverse of what you would think it would be. And it's just a really interesting commentary on the sort of corporatization of art, like what happens when bands get big enough that they get picked up by a major label and the kind of meat grinder that you go through when you suddenly have major label representation and what that does to the art. So that's a great book if you're interested in that at all.
awesome. Yeah, no, I very much so, and I'll actually be sharing the links to those as well. For the videos. So yeah.
Jim's also a
Uh,
novelist, so Jim also has novels out about music. So anything that Jim has
okay,
written, but just like that one in particular, is fabulous.
beautiful. Thank you. Um, Well, then, actually, speaking of novels, sharing links to them, sales, all that jazz. An
All
inelegant
that
segue, but a
jazz.
segue nonetheless. All that jazz. Yeah, the sales track, the Bob Fosse ads for the sales track. I am so intrigued. I'm so curious. I'm holding them both up so everyone can see and know these books. Um, we're going to talk about like the wild arc of a literary career, and you're going to be a single example of that. I don't know an arc that is. Um,
Speaking of
but this,
narratives, yeah.
right, yeah, speaking of narratives, um, speaking of Shakespeare's histories, so if we were villains was like I encountered this book as an international bestseller. So I was like, oh, cool, amazing. Like her debut really like popped off and that's awesome. You informed Portland, and you've been informing folks on Substack about this too. Your candor is very appreciated, by the way. Like that is not something that happens in the MFA world. So it's
Yes.
very yeah. We really need more of that. But you informed the group of us that like this, if we were villains, was kind of like a lot of debuts, sold nothing, hung out to dry, no publicity budget, no marketing budget. It was just kind of there. And but like now it's like an international bestseller, right? So this book has kind of had two lives, and I would really, really love to talk about that, tell us that whole story.
Yeah. Yeah, Villains went on a really wild journey. I wrote Villains when I was 22. I was a senior in college, which is I think a little too young. It was not the first book that I wrote. It was actually the fifth or sixth book that I wrote, but it was the first book that I wrote that felt like it was maybe worth a reader's time. And I knew enough about publishing to sort of have that instinct. I was like, oh, this book feels like it could maybe be something. And I did a summer stint at Iowa and I did a summer stint at the Denver Publishing Institute. So I was kind of like getting my feet wet in the industry, but I was still very, very young. Um, got a very nice deal on this book with my agent, really fought for it. It was preempted, and that was astonishing to me at the time. And I kind of went into it with the assumption of, oh, well, this means that the publisher is invested in it because they were invested in it, and the sort of assumption is that you're going to get sort of commensurate marketing support with the advance that you get, which unfortunately is not always the case because there's a lot of daylight between signing the contract and the book coming out. Um, and a lot of things happened internally between the signing of the contract and the launch of the book, and it really had nothing to do with me. It was all stuff that was happening internally with the publisher, they were going through a lot of kind of growing pains because it was a relatively new imprint, and I think they were still sort of finding their identity and maybe realizing that Villains was kind of not it, but I'm speculating. And so when the book came out, my editor was kind of not really around, so it didn't have a strong advocate at the imprint, did not get really any marketing support. It was also marketed to kind of the wrong audience. Um, the publisher was really intent on calling it a literary thriller, which it's not. People are also calling Hot Wax a thriller, which it's not. And that kind of sets a book up for failure because if you tell people it's a thriller and they go in and the book is actually a little bit slow and it's much more about the characters and the dynamics between them than it is about, who done it and how, people aren't going to like the book if it's the wrong reader. And I said, I think we're marketing this the wrong way. And they said, with all due respect, you're 22, like sit down and shut up. And I was like, fair enough. Um, but I was right. And the book came out and nobody read it. And the people who did didn't like it because they weren't the right readers. And my publisher kind of hung it around my neck and put me out to pasture and said, okay, we're done with that. We're not throwing good money after bad. Um, they had a right of first refusal clause in the contract, which they used to refuse. I sent them an early version of Hot Wax, and they were like, "Nope, we don't want this. We don't know what to do with it." So my agent and I went out on sub to try and find another editor. But at that point, the problem was my sales track for the debut was so bad that nobody wanted to touch anything I had to write after that because publishing loves a sure thing. And if you haven't proven that there's a track for your book, that you have a readership, your second book doesn't look like a good bet. And I know that you had a similar experience, I think. Um, so I had this kind of heartbreaking moment of being like 25, and the book that I thought was going to be the start of my career was really looking like it was going to be the end of my career. So I pivoted back to academia and I stopped calling myself a writer. I did not talk about the book because I found it so painful and so deeply mortifying that I just like kind of tried to pretend that whole part of my life like didn't really exist. Um, when I was talking to people in person, but the other like side of my life, the Shakespeare part of my life, I was getting a PhD in Shakespeare. The book is about Shakespeare, so I was talking about Shakespeare all the time. I had a little bit of a following on social media because I was a D-list Tumblr celebrity in college, not on purpose. It just sort of happened by accident. I was a book blogger, and the funny thing was
Oh,
my name was never on the account. It was all totally anonymous. Nobody knew who I was. But then when the book was coming out, my publisher was like, well, we have to use that. You've got 52,000 followers on Tumblr. We got to use that for sales. And guess what? It didn't work. They didn't buy the book. But um, that's the thing is like
wow.
the lie about having followers on social media is like you're gonna get maybe one book sale for every 1,000 people that are following you. It's like
Right.
such I keep waiting for that bubble to burst. But anyway, I had a few thousand followers on social media, and I was just talking about Shakespeare a lot because that was what I was doing for my PhD. So I also started to talk a little bit about the book in that space. And gradually, some people discovered it, mostly in the UK. We sub-licensed it to the UK, and they actually did go to bat for it. My UK publisher was like, yeah, we love this book. We're going to see if we can actually find some readers for it. So it became like a little cult thing in the UK. I was making no money from it because all that money was just going to my US publisher because they'd sub-licensed it to the UK. So I was like, great. Um, love that for you guys. And then a weird thing happened in 2020 where suddenly the sales numbers started doing this, and my agent and I were like, what the hell is going on? Um, and reconstructing it like forensically after the fact, I think it was three things at once. It was the pandemic was happening, everybody was reading more because they were sick of being on Zoom. And a lot of like nerdy young students who were looking forward to going off to school or back to school didn't get to do that because of the pandemic, and they kind of turned to campus novels as a vicarious version of that experience, which is where the dark academia boom came from. That was not a thing when I was writing villains, so I just got grandfathered into that like
Ah,
6 years after the fact, which has been a blessing and a curse, honestly. But then the other thing that happened was TikTok was popping off at the same time. So
mm,
people who had found my book on the internet were suddenly showing it to everyone else on the internet. And the book earned out in very short order after us being like deep, deep, deep in the red for years, which was so strange and so startling. And then suddenly everybody wanted to see what I had to write next because suddenly there were sales numbers. Um, And my agent said to me, she said, okay, we have this like very rare second chance here that most writers never get. What do you want to do? And being the stubborn fool that I am, I was like, I really want to make Hot Wax happen. I'm still carrying a torch for that book, even though it's died on sub 4 times. And God bless her, she said, okay, of all the books you've written, because I'd written a bunch of other books that we also couldn't sell. She said, of all the books you've written, that's the one I still think about. So let's try it. So I rewrote it while I was living out of my car, top down, because I was just older and I wanted the book to be different. And I had really evolved in my thinking about what the project should be. Um, and then we went on sub and the same thing happened. Nobody bought it. Everybody kept saying, can it just be more like if we were villains? But can it just be more like if we were villains? Everyone really just wanted me to do Villains Part Two, and I had no interest in doing that. I was like, I already wrote that book. I don't want to write that book again. I want to do more in different things. So that was a real scary weekend that we'd gone on sub and none of the reactions were good. And then like the next day, the next week on Monday morning, we had this like beautiful offer letter from the man who's now my editor, who just like he got it. He understood it and he was like, you can write in whatever genre you want. I just wanted to feel like the book is you. And I was like, that's what I want too. So amazing. And that was really kind of a dream come true, was finding an editor who was willing to let me do that, who was willing to let me play around in a bunch of different genres, because that's always been what I wanted to do and was kind of important to me because I've lived so many lives and I love so many things. I want to be able to do that with my fiction, because if I didn't, it wouldn't feel like me, paradoxically.
Yeah, man, that I know that was nonfiction, but I definitely had that, oh my God, I've been there moment. You
Yeah.
acknowledged it. Yeah, that was this. This was my like pain and embarrassment
So re
terror book.
remi- remind me when that book came out.
2018. So I think
Okay.
we're like the same age. I was born in
We're
89. I was 28.
Yes, we were like neck and neck with our books coming out. And I remember that book coming out and being everywhere. It was on my TBR list for a long time.
What? That's okay. And this is wild to me because I'm like, well, no one knows about this book. No one saw this book. No one bought this book. This is my private failure. And
No, I
like it,
actually remember where I saw that book. It was because I love graphic design. I'm not a good artist, but I love just like looking at graphic design. I follow a lot of blogs that are all about good book cover art. And I remember
mm,
seeing that one on the blog and I was like, oh yeah, that is great cover art. Um,
man, yeah, it really is.
yeah.
I love that artist. Sorry, go on. I didn't
But
mean to
yeah,
cut
so
you off.
you had the same sort of experience.
Yes, yeah. It was exactly the same. It was down to they used the first right of refusal to just promptly refuse. I actually had my short story collection Bugsy written, and because I had this albatross of a sales track from the come down.
I've also called villains an albatross.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you're like they hung it around my neck, I was like, okay, Coleridge. Like it's the same thing, right? It's like I was just like, I don't know, what's going to be done about this. And but so it was I had this collection of short stories. I actually don't have a copy. I've gifted all my copies, but like it was Bugsy, and my agent at the time, he was like, you have to write a novel to sell this. You have to write a whole novel to sell this, or else it won't sell. And so I did. I wrote Confidence, which was a total blast. It was just like very, very fun. And very, I think, again, similar to kind of what you're describing of just like, ugh, I've lived different lives. I love sort of like feeling my way into a research project. And I'm really interested in financial behaviorism and conning and just, the pyramid scheme as a concept, both theory and practice. And so I was just like, okay, I'll write this book, Confidence, and and that was also preempted. It did better. And it's also just like, and this is kind of getting into my personal just like questions and experience, but I'm just like, I look at writers who, because there are some writers, great writers, millennial writers, who really kind of are like, I'm going to engineer like my book's marketing strategy myself so this gets on the USA Today list, right? I could think of a few whose books I really love, and they did that, right? And more power to them. I don't know if I have the stomach for that like level of social engagement and understanding. Like I can be like really captivating in an event. I can, do a great reading. I can do this, but like to be on Instagram, for instance, engaged in that way. However, that does produce the sales track. And so I'm bringing this back to kind of what happened for you. Like you had this like incredible just good fortune, right? Of like, because there's so many books, it's hard to, like push yours to the front sometimes. And your book got found. And I'm just like really curious, like how do you balance that? I think that's what I want to ask, Em, because like we discussed how like the bad sales track thing is also kind of a psyop. Like, yes, people have bad sales tracks. It feels like everyone has a bad sales track, including explosive book talk bestsellers that
Yeah.
underperformed. You know what I mean? It's like, how do you balance those industry expectations with what you want to do? Now that you do have the platform that you do.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And a lot of it, I think, is as much as I hate this, a lot of it is learning to sell yourself not just to a reader, but to a publisher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of that
I won't
comes
feel so
down,
sad.
yeah, but a lot of it comes down to just being able to articulate succinctly what it is about your work that is consistent if you want to write in a bunch of different genres. Um, This is an exercise that I make my writing students do, and it's always very eye-opening for them. It's like my favorite thing to make young writers do in class is I make them journal. And the thing is, like, I don't journal. I don't journal. I've never kept a diary. I don't like writing about myself. I do write about my writing process. I fill pages and pages and pages writing about like what I'm struggling with a project, how this character is not cooperating, like the research that I'm doing, just because I think getting that stuff down on paper often is what helps me work through it. So, one thing I make my writing students do, and they've almost never done this, is I have them sit down and write for 30 minutes about what do I write, how do I write, and why do I write. And I make them go deeper, not just like I write science fiction because I like spaceships. Like I want you to sit down and think about what are the major themes in your work? What are the features that tie all your work together? What are the patterns in your work? Um,
Mhm.
what are the things that make it a you book? How do you write? What is your approach to fiction? I really like a narrative. I also really like group stories. I write a lot of dialogue, that kind of thing. And then why do you write? Like, what is the actual reason that you're doing this? What is your artistic motivation for putting yourself through this? Because it's not easy work. And if
No.
you can articulate those things to yourself, it makes it so much easier to talk to a publishing professional about what you do in a way that they can go, oh, yeah, I can envision how I would market that. And as much as
Yeah.
that sucks, it's like a really useful skill to have. It goes like one step beyond the elevator pitch so
Hmm.
that I can say to people, yeah, I write upmarket fiction that has really interesting character dynamics, but also enough of a plot to keep pages turning. And I can tell somebody, I really, really like writing about performing arts because I'm a performance studies scholar. I like that tension between onstage and backstage drama. You'll see a lot of that in my books. Um, and as for the why you write, that's, a little more of a soul searching thing. But if you can kind of nail down what you're doing and why as a writer in a way that you can articulate to yourself and also to another person, I think it does make it much easier to kind of speak the language of the industry in a way that still stays true to like what your art is about. And it can help keep you from losing touch with it when you have to do all the shitty stuff like Instagram. Um, so that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is I like to try to prime readers to receive my work in the right kind of way. I think that goes a long
Mm.
way. So, like what I do on my Substack and to a lesser degree on my Instagram, which is where most of my followers is because hi, we're millennials. I'm not on TikTok because I just can't.
Yeah.
Um,
Nope.
but
No.
I no, I can't. I open it, it's so overstimulating that I immediately want to just like smack my phone off the table. But I try to kind of create the audience before the book comes out. So I talk a lot about, I've talked a lot about the music that I'm writing about on Substack and on my Instagram. I share a lot about my record collection because people love hearing people talk about stuff that they're experts on. Um, and doing that in the conjunction of like, let me talk about all this because I have a book about it that's coming out soon. I hate reels. I hate reels more than anything in the world, but Instagram is just like we love reels. That's the only thing we want. And I got shadow banned for a minute, and I was like, I got to figure out how to like reset the algorithm. And at the same time, we were getting some early readers who were reading Hot Wax and were very confused by the timeline because they were young and they don't know what A-sides and B-sides are because they don't have records. So I just made this stupid little one-off reel where I was basically explaining why it's an A side and a B side and how records work. And I'm like standing in front of my record player, like with visual aids. And that reel, for some reason, achieved escape velocity because people were like, oh, we love hearing people nerd out about stuff that they're into. Um,
Mm,
so I did that for months and months and months before the book came out. And so my existing readership that knew me from the Shakespeare novel, they knew a little bit about vinyl by the time they got to Hot Wax. So I think the long game is part of it, like knowing that you have to kind of be in this for the long haul with the marketing as well, and thinking of it as a way to like teach your readers how to read your book. Um, for me is a lot less soul destroying than just being like, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, because we do this because we love something. And
right.
as much as I hate doing reels, if you point a cell phone at me, I can talk about vinyl and how much I love records, no problem.
Mm.
So I think if the passion really comes across, that's a way to sell things, is people are like, ooh, I want a little piece of that because I can tell that that person is so enthusiastic about that thing. So reframing marketing as like, this is a way that I get to share stuff that I'm passionate about with an audience that I can't reach in person has really, really helped, I think, both my sales and my just kind of like mental state about it. So I
Uh,
don't just feel like a shill, kind of constantly trying to sell things. Instead, I'm like, I'm a record nerd who's trying to share something that I love. Um,
yeah.
and then, you kind of have to put it in marketing speak when you talk to publishing people. But if you can do that, I think you have much better odds of kind of elbowing your way into the marketplace.
I was kind of like messaging I was messaging with Lee Stein on Substack about this, and she's very much a like I see her as kind of like the guru who's able to guru in a good way, who's able to kind of like meld like art and content and like understand
Hmm.
like how to create the content that like helps people access your art. It's she's amazing at it. But I was like, she posted something and we were talking about it. I was like, I'm realizing that it is so naive to just be like, I'm idealizing a magical time before Instagram Reels where books like were learned about via like viral word of mouth. It's like, yeah, but didn't Philip Roth go on the Johnny Carson show and pick a fight with Norman Mailer? In fact,
Yeah.
didn't Norman Mailer like he when he was hosting that town hall, that feminist town hall, where Susan Sontag like tore him a friggin' new one. He was promoting a book. Like that was a
Yeah.
stunt. That was a publicity stunt because he was a chauvinist. So like it's like maybe I am not right the person who can like achieve like a Lee Stein level of expertise, right? Um, or maybe I will never be able to stomach reels and be so eloquent on them as you are or others are, but like maybe it's also the case, right, that doing something of that ilk, right, is better than like doing nothing. And it's naive to think that like this type of promotion, content-based promotion, never existed in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like I could like be like, oh wow, look at James Baldwin on the whatever news hour. Well, he's talking about the fire next time, so I think it's like,
Yeah, for some
yeah,
reason, like I think a lot of writers get into this kind of like ivory tower headspace of like I should never have to think about the market and just like the art will speak for
yeah,
itself, and it's like no, baby, it won't. Like
it
that's not the
won't,
world we live in, and
sadly.
that's really never been the world we live in. Like
Yeah,
it used to
right.
be that artists had wealthy patrons, and that was how they
Mm-hmm.
survived, and now we have to kind of be our own wealthy patrons. Um, and the other part of it, and this is the part that I think a lot of writers miss out on, is your publisher is going to be so much more willing to take a chance on you and to allocate more resources to you if they can see that you're making an effort on your own behalf. That's part of
Yeah,
it too.
yeah,
My publicist recently jokingly called me in a meeting. She was like the hardest working bitch in book biz. And I don't know if I would go that far, but I hustle. I get out there and I
yeah.
hustle. I'm doing a 40 city book tour. I'm driving myself to a lot of it. I did the same thing for Graveyard Shift. My publisher was like, I don't know if we're really going to do book events. And I was like, I will get in the car and I will drive myself 20,000 miles to go see readers in places who don't normally get to have book events.
Mhm.
Because we have this mindset that publishing like only exists in the Northeast, which is so misguided and
Well,
backwards. We
yeah,
really need to bring book events to people who live in the middle of the country and don't get that kind of programming. But
yeah,
a publisher will be much more likely to jump on your bandwagon. You don't need to have thousands and thousands of followers, but they do want to see that you're willing to make an effort to sell your own stuff
yeah,
because that's part of your job as the author, especially in an age of the cult of personality. But the other thing I would say about it too is that kind of like content that's on message, like I am making content that is about the thing that I write about because I love it and it's coming from a genuine place, it will attract people who don't know anything about you as a writer. I have a whole
yeah.
little cohort of people on Substack who are mostly like, interestingly, men in their 60s and 70s who have told me they're just following this blog because they love the Hot Wax Wednesday feature that I do, which is every couple of weeks I do a thing where I just like feature an artist, like a musical artist that was major in the writing of the book. So I've accidentally doing that attracted some
Oh,
people who are really just music fans who are like,
and the dad rock
yeah, like
crowd.
dad rock
Yeah,
fans who are like, I'm just
that's
here to hear you talk
amazing.
about the 13th floor elevators, but you know what? Those people might buy my book too, which is
Right?
really
No,
cool, which
yeah.
is really cool. So
Yes,
it's
it
like
is.
you got to think about how you're going to find the people who also love the thing you love and want to read a book about it. Like, where are those people? Where is their digital water cooler? Um, and if you can think about it as like a way to connect with the right audience, it becomes way, way less miserable to spend a couple hours of your workday on fucking Instagram.
Yeah, no, no, I totally hear you. And I mean, it's also like to kind of we keep doing callbacks to your Portland event, but it's also it's so helpful, I think, to remember without being mired in the fact, but to like remember that like we do this and we like make these exceptions and we like go on Instagram for 2 hours, we do all this because to not write would be a kind of death. That is the case for me. Like it's
Yeah.
and no drama here because it's just facts. It's just fucking
Yeah.
facts. It's like I must write. I will. My entire life is in service of this. I'm gonna do this. And
Yes.
so yeah, and that's why it's like so helpful. It kind of a great callback to Gill of the Kills, right? It's like so helpful to remember um what you really care about and like what you're trying to like make possible the next
Hmm.
day. The fact that this book is about a band that hasn't they're not the Rolling Stones, right? They're minor, and they're just trying to make enough money at this gig to play the next. I mean
Exactly.
that's like life. That
Hmm.
is the life of a working artist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that's my entire goal is just for my books to do well enough that I can make more books because
Yeah.
yeah, as you say, we talked about this quite a bit in Portland. Somebody asked a question about like how do you keep the faith when like I've been working on this book for almost 10 years. How do you
Yeah.
keep the faith? How do you keep doing it? And it's like because to stop would be to die. Like literally,
Yep.
I don't know what brand of neurospicy you are. I've never met a writer who's not some kind of neurospicy. And it's like that is the thing that keeps my brain from shredding itself like a rat in a trap is
Yeah.
this other realm that I get to exist in mentally, creatively, whatever. And yeah, that's like, yeah, I'll do whatever I have to. If I have to prostitute myself on Instagram for an hour a day, fine. If that is the thing that makes it so that I can keep writing books, I will do that. Um,
Yeah. No, I mean, this is fabulous advice, I think, especially for mid-career people. But my last question I really want to close out with here is the advice for the early career writer or the writer who hasn't published yet. You said a really, really fabulous thing at the event about how young writers or beginning writers of any age really need to get used to like revision and not just get used to it, but learn to love it. Like learn to
yeah.
just embrace it because I agree with you. It's amazing. I love it is most of what writing is. Can you talk to kind of close us out here? Can you talk a bit more about why revision is so important?
Yes. Yeah, it's bound. So the thing that I hammer this in with my students too is learn to love revision if you don't love it naturally. I do love it. It's my favorite part of the process. Um, and I think it's bound up with the fact that we live in this very like rapid fire youth obsessed culture where we want everything to happen really fast. I talk to a lot of young writers who are like have this insane expectation that they're going to have a book out and be on the New York Times bestseller list by the time they're 25. And I'm like, baby, no, that's not how it works. Most people don't publish until their 30s or 40s. This is a long, slow business, and it is that way by design. It is a feature, not a bug. Good literature takes time. A novel is a massive undertaking. You don't just write one draft and it's perfect. You write one draft and it's shit. And the process of revision for me is all about finding out what I'm actually talking about and what the major themes of the book really are. Because I always start with a first draft from a place of, I want to tell a good story about interesting people. And then when I get into revision, that's where I do that really deep level stuff about like, ooh, what are the major themes that are actually at work here? How do I refine this so that the plot moves in a certain kind of a way? Um, and often, the other thing is, and this is a thing that I say frequently that people are always kind of like, oh, yeah. Part of the reason I think this book died on sub the first couple of times is that I just wasn't old enough to write it. I wasn't a good enough writer to write it. I think my ambition had kind of overreached my skill at that point. There was so much that I wanted this book to be that I couldn't just hold all at the same time when I was 25 and trying to write it for the first time. And revision is the process of taking that lump of coal and really turning it into a diamond, of making a book what it is supposed to be. It's how you get from what you have on the page to the ideal version of the book that exists in your head. And like those two things will never touch, but revision is how you get as close as you can. It's for me, it's where the magic really happens. It's how I really figure out what's actually going on at the core of the work. And it's also just, that's writing life. The first draft is like 1% of the work that you're going to do. And the rest of it is going to be rewriting it with yourself and with your agent and with your editor. And if you're resistant to that process or you're thinking of it as remedial, you're not doing good work and you're going to limit how good your work can ever be if you're unwilling to like fully give yourself to the process of making it better.
Truer words. Yeah, it's really like the first draft was the data dump, right? The first draft is like you really do have to make the marks on the page.
Yes.
And that is like maybe 1 or even 0.5% of the work that lies ahead of you. I think I really annoyed my MFA students. This would be the first time when I was just like, I write a first draft and then I write the second draft from whole cloth all over again, and then I write the third draft from whole cloth. And they were like, "You're vile." And but it really is like it's for me, I do need to open, metaphorically speaking and literally, a different document, right? Because I'm constantly refining material. It's like I'm looking for diamonds in the silt.
Yeah.
And the patterns emerge, structures emerge, new characters, form, or characters are collapsed into one. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
I think it's great advice to new writers.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, the way I think about it is like, what a gift, truly. Like,
Hmm.
it's not really just one book. It's like I've written 10 books in order to write Hot Wax. This is
Yeah.
just the best of those 10 books. This is the final version of it. It's the best version of it, and sometimes it takes 10 years to get there. But like I got to write 10 books about a thing that I love and
Mhm.
try a bunch of different ways of writing that book until I kind of landed on the version that is the right version or like the final version. And
Yeah.
I think that why are you rushing through your own creative process? Aren't you doing this because you enjoy it? Aren't you doing this because you love it? Aren't you doing this because you're a craftsman? If you're just so myopically focused on the output and the kind of gratification of that, like this is not a business for you. Publishing
Mhm.
it, like writing and publishing it's not an art for impatient people. It's unless you really love being in the pit and doing the work, like why are you here is kind of how I feel about it. And revision is really where all the work happens.
Whew, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. This is not the life for someone who wants to break the algorithm immediately.
Yeah, and it's like, and
Um,
that's not to say it's not hard. Like, of course it's hard, but
yeah.
nobody told you writing was easy, I hope. I don't know if this is helpful. I actually last year when I was revising, like doing the really intensive revisions on Hot Wax, I actually did a whole series on Substack about revision. I did a series that was called Revision 101, where I just kind of walked through like different approaches to revision every week. To make people hate revision less. And a lot of people told me it was helpful. So that's there if anybody wants it. If you like are one of those writers who really loathes revision, I might have some stuff there that could be helpful. But yeah, it's my favorite part of the process. It's like the story is written and it's just where I get to go really deep with it, where I get to be granular about the language, where I get to know the characters so intimately that they start to really feel like real people. So yeah, I love that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, to me, like it's like you could almost take the word revision out and just substitute writing the novel because that is the
Yeah.
entirety of it for me. Is yeah,
Yeah.
it's no, it's a great, and I'll be sure to link to your series as well. I'll see if I can dig it up. But wonderful advice. Thank you so much. Here's Hot Wax again. Everyone, purchase this book. We both have
It's
copies.
shiny.
It is quite shiny. Oh, I love
I
that.
I love that spot
Um,
gloss.
thank you. And yeah, I'm sure we'll see each other anon.
Oh, yes, I hope so. Thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation.